Okay, all right, let's go.
We better kick off. So,
All right.
first of all, welcome everybody to a very, very special Silicon Block Fireside chat. Thank you all for taking your time to join us. Firstly, of course, whilst we have a predominantly Victorian audience, we also have guests from across Australia and the world. So I'd like to acknowledge that most of us sit on the unceded lands of First Nations people everywhere, and that we pay our respects to the elders past, present, and emerging, for they hold the memories, the traditions, the culture, and hopes of their peoples across the nation and the planet. We acknowledge the particular risks First Nations people and all elders are in during the current COVID-19 crisis. And of course, although we are starting to emerge out of this, we must all continue to share the government's key message that to continue to isolate and commit to the varying levels of restrictions that are in place are key, because we are all in this together. Questions in the chat. Today, we obviously have a very large audience. Normally, we take questions in both the chat and the Q&A. Today, we'll only be taking questions in the Q&A. Do feel free to continue the dialogue in the back channel. We will try and pick up what's in there from time to time. And that'll, of course, include a couple of audience questions, which, as usual, where it's a yes/no question, plus for yes, minus for no. And a sentiment question, if we ask that, is 1 through 5. In order to make sure you do have the right settings, do make sure that you have set your, when you have the message window open, there is a drop down that you should set to all panelists and attendees, and that will ensure that all commentary comes through. Of course, my name's Russel Hayes. I'm the CEO of IE Company. I'm one of the co-founders of Silicon Block. We have virtualized our events, and welcome again to this 6th in our series. Today is an unashamedly big conversation about exploring the future role of the Australian economy in a significantly adjusted global landscape. Disruption always sets the stage for new opportunities, and the COVID-19 pandemic has brought about disruption on a scale and depth like no other time in Australian history. As we emerge from the early stages of its impact on our society and economy, we now seek to understand where to from here. My overwhelming sense, talking to people far and wide, is that everyone's itching to get going. We're pining to get back to business, reconnect with colleagues, and fire up our organisations. But there is an underlying anxiety. This anxiety is perhaps best framed by the unknowns. What will our medium and long-term economy look like? In which direction should we place our limited resources to innovate? And what role does the Australian economy play in an increasingly nationalistic global marketplace? Mark Andreessen recently posted on the failure of Silicon Valley innovation, citing the inability of America's innovation machine to adequately respond to the challenges of the moment. Given the Valley has been the template for cities and countries across the world, must we now question our approach to innovation and its value? To tackle these complicated questions and complicated and emerging questions, I'm absolutely privileged to be joined by 2 brilliant minds today, neither of which require much introduction, but I will just briefly call out their bios. Mr. Malcolm Turnbull, of course, was the 29th Prime Minister of Australia. Prior to entering politics, he enjoyed successful careers as a lawyer, investment banker, and journalist. He co-founded the first big Australian internet company, Aussie Mail, which listed on the NASDAQ in 1996 and was later sold to WorldCom 3 years later. Malcolm joined Goldman Sachs in 1997, becoming a partner of the firm the following year, and headed their Australian business for 4 years until he retired to pursue a political career. He entered the Australian Parliament in 2004, and during that time served as Minister for the Environment and Water Resources, Minister for Communications, and of course, as our Prime Minister from 2015 to 2018. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Turnbull. Of course, also we have Russel Howcroft, who is the public face of brand marketing and advertising in Australia, thanks to his appearances on ABC's hugely successful show, The Gruen Transfer, and Network 10's Recipe to Riches. Russel has worked with some of the best agencies in the world, including Lowe, Howard, Spink, Leonardi Brandhouse, and George Patterson Y&R. Russel is currently the Chief Creative Officer and Partner at PwC in Australia, amongst numerous other accolades. Mr. Turnbull, if I could start with you. First of all, congratulations on the new book, A Bigger Picture, which I have been enjoying getting through. I noted that Lee Sales opened when she with you the other day and said that you couldn't have imagined the world might have changed so much from when you set the publishing date. I'd like to know How does this book and in this current context set the scene for what's next for you?
How does the book set the context?
And now that the book's out,
Right.
And in this current environment,
That's a great question. Well, basically, the book has taken, it's a big book. It's taken quite a long time to write. And so what I'm doing now is I'm out of politics. I mean, I'm still expressing views and will express views on political issues, but I'm not a political player. I'm certainly, well out of party politics and parliamentary politics. So I'm mostly focusing on investing in the venture capital area. I'm back doing that. I've got that's what I used to do in the past. I had some success at it, and I'm doing that again. And so I've been, I was on a call this morning with the team at Advanced Navigation, great new Australian company, sort of inertial navigation company, really just doing brilliantly well. You would have read recently that I'm one of the investors in the latest round of Myriota, the South Australian satellite company, and there's plenty of others too. Safety Culture, invested with them recently. So basically, that's what I'm doing. I'm passionate about innovation, passionate about technology. I think the innovation and science agenda had a huge impact, positive impact in Australia. And I've really, to be honest, since I got out of politics, so many people in this sector have confirmed that to me, which is really thrilling. And that's what I like. That's what I'm doing. So that's, and apart from that, being a good grandfather and husband and all of those father and all of those things that you have more time for when you're not running the country.
And home decorator, noting the blinds have changed a couple of times.
Yeah. Well, this is behind us. Is the bookcase is not? I won't bore you with it, but it looks better with a something in front of it. And I actually, at one point when this all started, I had an Australian flag hanging there, and which was very patriotic, but it looked a bit. I think it probably looks better to have.
Looks a bit DIY.
Yeah. No, well, this is actually just a little. This is made by. Here, I'll take the camera off, and I'll just give you a closer look. So these are made by a company called Utopia Goods, and they've got they do fabrics and curtains and upholstery, and it's all based around Australian flora. And when I was Prime Minister, the lodge had just been renovated, in a pretty catastrophic renovation, I might add, but which only the government could do. But Lucy got a lot of the curtains made from that material, and it's just it's a good example. It's not technology per se, but it's a good example of Australian innovation in design with a distinctly Australian product. So there.
Very nice. Russell, speaking of the fusion of creativity, maybe at a slightly different, in a different context. Most of us know, I've known you for a very long time professionally, but most people would perhaps know you through your commentary, particularly on Ruin Transfer and other TV appearances. It'd be good
like Recipe to Riches. Thanks for mentioning that.
It was in the bio that was the
Malcolm Turnbull running the country, and I'm on Recipe to Riches.
Considering I know all of the other things that you do, I don't know why that was in the bio that I got given. But anyway, there you go. But speaking of which, given that Recipe to Riches is not a core part of your day-to-day activities, could you expand upon what, because we're going to deep dive a little bit on what your drive behind creativity as a stimulant for the Australian economy. Starting with, what is a chief creative officer doing inside a multinational advisory firm like PwC? What is that role, and why is it so important that it's been elevated to that level by PwC?
Well, the very fact that PwC is happy for their brand to have someone who's called the chief creative officer. So whether it's me or someone else, it's just the fact that seat exists is incredibly important, and it shows, of course, that organisations like PwC, what you might think they are and what they actually are, is in many cases really different. They're very innovative and very creative. The individuals that work there, of course, they're very clever, and they're a great mixture of left brain and right brain, and they're highly collaborative. They're incredible. It's actually quite an incredible organisation, and they're very keen to be thought leaders in all sectors and all segments of society and in industry. And they, of course, believe in the power of communication, because you can do amazing things, but if not enough people know about it, then perhaps you're missing out on an opportunity. I did want to say that when you introduced Mr. Turnbull, you didn't talk about the fact that he had a bit of an advertising career. So that's an important fact. Absolutely.
I know about journalists and Kerry Packer's lawyer. Advertising?
Copywriter.
For
John Singleton.
Exactly. Yeah. So obviously an incredibly successful advertising, entrepreneur, media person. I also just wanted to say that Utopia Goods absolutely is super. I can't remember the name of the artist. His wife is a very old friend of ours. Sophie Tatlow is her name.
Yeah,
Sophie, but I can't remember. You Google it, but a beautiful art, because it's all hand done. It really is super stuff. Anyway, so
as I said, I did promise we'd.
Yes, he's brilliant.
Bruce.
I did promise we'd be tackling the big questions.
Yeah.
Well, no.
So it'd be good to get a good run though.
Yeah. So and
little did they know, this is sort of people are going to be saying, what have I stumbled onto a Pinterest streaming program about technology.
Well, and the other thing, of course, the Chief Creative Officer, what's brilliant from my point of view is that, of course, PwC gets into serious boardrooms. It gets into the C-suite. It gets into the boardroom.
Yep.
Off the back of that, I can be in the boardroom, and therefore talk about creativity in the context of business and talk about it in the context of value add. And that's been a thing for me for a very long time. Like 15 years plus ago, I was part of the AFR summit, and I was talking about return on creativity. And, I'm not saying I was laughed at, but I sort of felt like I was being laughed at. But that's something that I absolutely fundamentally believe in, that there is an X factor around it. And so it's a great privilege for me, and I'm very thankful to PwC because they've appointed a Chief Creative Officer, and I'm thankful because it happens to be me.
There is actually an important correlation to where we're going to go with the conversation, because I think there is a perception that innovation is the exclusive domain of software development and to a lesser extent hardware. And I think we've got a more fundamental set of questions ahead of us in this country in regards to innovation. Mr. Turnbull, I think it's fair to say that we've come to accept that a return to normal is not a matter of flicking on a switch, and that the economic and social recovery will be gradual and cautious. In your view, what does this actually look like? And I know it's still very early on, and I mean that in two parts potentially. Firstly, at a global level, and then in that context, how does this play out for the Australian economy?
Okay, well, I've got a sort of an analytical framework I'd like to propose. I think firstly, we've got to look at, we've got to ask ourselves, what does the medical epidemiological landscape look like? Does a vaccine appear, which makes this, can wipe this out, like in many places polio has been wiped out. Is there a quick fix? So that's a big question. Let's assume though, like most most coronaviruses, it persists, but it becomes less damaging because more people develop immunity, whether through vaccination or herd immunity over time, but it's still going to be around. Okay. I think so that's the first context. The analytical framework I'd suggest is this. There are some trends which this will accelerate, existing trends to doing things like this, for example. To working remotely, You know, businesses will say, you know, do I really need all that office space at $1,000 a metre? You know, maybe I'll have a quarter as much and have people working more remotely. It may suit them better. You know, they may do it from home, or they may have a, you know, be working from a, you know, a shared workspace, or a, you know, like an office, you know, spread out outside a city or another in other places. So I think that trend is going to be accelerated. Obviously, online commerce is going to be accelerated. So I don't know that you'd want to be long bricks and mortar retail, or bricks and mortar, or, you know, or office commercial space. So all of those are existing trends. But then there's the very interesting dimension. What will this reverse existing trends? And so, you know, cities have been made more powerful and more influential than ever by technology. When the internet arrived, we all assumed, because of this enhanced connectivity, that we would be able to do what you're doing, you know, sit on a mountain in, you know, in the countryside and, you know, rule the world from there. But instead, actually, cities became more important. And, you know, because we're social animals, we started to see density as the solution rather than the problem. And, you know, people wanted to live closer to the center. Is that going to reverse? You know, are we going to want to be more distributed? So all of those things that we've been used to doing and enjoying, which are very human, congregating together in large numbers, is that going to be, is there going to be a trend away from that? Generally, and the final point I'd make is, I think the march of technology will only be accelerated. The fact is that we have been able to, yes, this has been a shocking disruption to the economy, but the fact that so much activity has been able to be continued because of tech, you know, connectivity, technology, you know, all of the you know, collaborative working tools, whether it's Zoom or, you know, Team or, you know, Skype, you know, there's a gazillion of them. All of those are going to be terrifically accelerated. Supply chains will shorten, undoubtedly. That will be enhanced by AI and automation. Regrettably, at the political level, I think this will encourage populism, chauvinism, protectionism. We've got to be really careful about that in Australia. We have a massive vested interest in an open markets and free trade. There's a lot about that in my book, and how I managed to keep the Trans-Pacific Partnership alive after Trump pulled out. But boy, we got to hang on to that, because I tell you, you know, protectionism is a catastrophe, for a train wreck for Australia. We cannot afford to get down that road.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll go a little bit deeper into some of those topics in a moment. But Russell, I wanted to get your view. Do you think Australia is, comparative to the state of the nation coming into this, and in the context of the whole world suffering, do you think we are in a strong place as an economy coming out of this to recover and thrive?
Well, I'm going to say the obvious. I hope so. I feel. No, I do. I agree with Malcolm with regard to, it's so interesting how much business has been able to continue. You know, so there's 8,000 staff at PwC, literally overnight, everyone's at home, and there wasn't even a hiccup. So just incredible. You know, the chief technology officer of PwC is the hero, and deservedly so, because he actually just made it absolutely seamless. And business has never been busier. It's very interesting. Again, the working from home, not doing the commute, not sort of wandering around the office, you know, bumping into people is fascinating, I think, just how productive people have become. And it's going to be quite interesting in time when I'm sure people will study the productivity that occurred during now this is for people that are working from home. Obviously, there's a lot of industries that are in a lot of trouble. But those of us that are in, say, the service industry, I think, I'd be fascinated to see the numbers in the end, but I'm imagining that we've become way more productive. I think the opportunity, though, is for us to slingshot out and hopefully create something of a different economy. Hopefully create something which really does recognise the importance of technology, the importance of digital innovation. We'd all love that to happen. Of course, we'd love that to occur. I do also think that the idea of regions growing is a really, really significant part of our future. Those of us that live in Melbourne, we know that the streets have become, increasingly very seriously congested, and it's because of the hub and spoke that is Melbourne. All roads point to the one spot. So actually making sure that Bendigo, Ballarat, Geelong, Horsham, etc., are thriving and growing regions, I think that that's something which will definitely happen. That's obviously not next week, but over the coming decade. It's interesting, isn't it, that the AFL's talking about having their pods. So just that, maybe a regional pod, just that is a really interesting, I think, signal of the future. I think there's a bit of an attitudinal shift I can imagine occurring as well. As we all know, the Edelman survey every year forever, it comes out and says, there's a decline in trust. There's a decline in trust of institutions, whether they be financial, whether they be media, whether it be government. I actually think there's a very interesting opportunity post-COVID around growth in trust of institutions. I can see that happening, and I think that institutions should see that. They should see that as an opportunity, and they need to act and behave accordingly in order to make that happen. Is it a U shape? Is it a V shape? I think we all hope that it's a V shape. There's a lot of energy going into making sure July 1 kicks off really powerfully. I think it's fair to say May and June will be what May and June will be. It's hard to actually genuinely influence that. But I do think we can influence July 1st. So in terms of like business planning, pipeline planning, opportunities, putting energy into one's day, I know I'm really, really focused on, well, what can we make sure we can land on July 1 and do our best, certainly do my best, and then do our best to, make sure it's V.
Yeah, and I suppose private enterprise can only do so much at this point in time, and a lot of the lead is taken from government. Mr. Turnbull, a hallmark of the early part of your prime ministership was obviously the establishment of the National Innovation and Science Agenda. You've been quoted as lamenting a stepping back from this since your departure. What role should the government be taking to transition the Australian economy now?
Oh, leading role, definitely. It has to.
Yeah.
And it clearly is. It's with programs like JobKeeper, it's certainly stepping up, increasing the unemployment benefit. All of those things are critically important, and there could be so many others. But I think what I was really lamenting was that the view has developed in Canberra, and it was there while I was PM too, that talking about innovation is a bad idea politically. It's basically it's a word that can't be uttered in I'm told in government circles now, which is really terrible because it's critically important. Pardon?
If I could just interject, there's actually a second question I actually had, because I did pick up that as well. Why is the electorate afraid of the word innovation? I think I've heard you use language something to that.
Yeah,
extent.
well, I think people are concerned. People get apprehensive about change because they worry that if technology comes along and changes the way my business operates, does that mean I'll lose my job? Well, you know what, it might actually. It might mean you lose your job. But the important thing is to have a strong economy that is innovative and is creating new jobs. I mean, the point is you've got to decide in this age of change, unprecedented both in its scale and pace, whether you're going to take advantage of it or whether you're going to be a victim of it. I've often compared it to surfing. It's like, do you decide the surf is there, the waves are crashing down? Do you just stand there and get dumped on, or do you say, no, I'm going to catch this wave and I'm going to ride it, you know, into the beach. I'm going to be Stephanie Gilmore rather than King Canute. And that's really the challenge. And the NISA, which we kicked off, as you remember, in November 2015, has been very, very successful. I mean, I mean, everyone on this call will appreciate this, but the transformation of our tech sector and venture capital sector in particular since then, you know, I remember when you could not raise a cent, you know, you couldn't raise $1 for tech in Australia, you know, back in the 90s, and wasn't much better in the early 2000s. And now there is a ton of money here. There is so much. We're creating one unicorn after another, some of them gigantic companies. I mean, obviously Atlassian is the biggest one, but it is, you know, there's so much great Australian technology here, and you've got people now coming to invest in it. Now, you know, a friend of mine, I'm sure he wouldn't mind if I say his name, but I won't, just because I'll be discreet, but a friend of mine who is in the venture capital business and has been so for a long time, and has a business in Israel and in the States and in the Valley and here. So he's, you know, he's got his fingers on those three pulses at least. He reckons the tech sector here is as dynamic as it is in Israel. And I said, oh, that can't possibly be right. And he said, no, absolutely right. And he went through the, you know, all of the numbers. So we're doing pretty well. I mean, look at InQtel, you know, the CIA's own venture capital arm, you know, they've set an up an office in Australia and are investing, you know, actively. Wow. So we should be really proud of what we've done, but, you know, it is important for government to support it. I mean, I think all of the measures we had in the NISA, and there was about 25 of them, they're all valuable, you know, setting up the big CSIRO fund that Main Sequence Ventures now runs, you know, the tax breaks, the insolvency reforms, you know, there's a ton of them. But I think in many ways, the most powerful thing was the fact that I was using that megaphone, that bully pulpit of the Prime Ministership to talk up innovation. And so you started to get super funds saying, gosh, you know, the Prime Minister's talking about innovation all the time. What are we doing on innovation? Well, not very much, actually. Okay, well, we better allocate some money to VC. And I think all of that was very important. It's, you know, if you give up on innovation, you give up on productivity. And if you give up on productivity, you give up on prosperity. It's that simple.
I've been follow-on question, last question I'll ask you about government policy, but the Morrison government has acted fairly quickly to establish the National COVID-19 Coordination Commission chaired by Nev Power. We've just been observing their initial role seems fairly preliminary at the moment, but there's a lot of, my observation is there's been a lot of suggestion that there'll be a focus on a re-establishment of the Australian manufacturing sector. Assuming that that is correct, what's your views on, first of all, the function of that commission and its power to potentially drive future Australian innovation? Is it the right vehicle? And second part of the question is, are we at the dawn of a new birth of manufacturing in Australia?
Well, I hope so, but it's got to be manufacturing that's, you know, that's economically viable. You know, you don't want to go back to some sort of protectionist era where you've got Australian manufacturers, you know, operating behind big tariff walls or benefiting from huge subsidies. I mean, which would be inconsistent with some of our free trade agreements too, by the way. So, you know, the opportunity, I think, in Australia for manufacturing is for advanced manufacturing. That's one of the reasons why we put some, you know, we've put so much effort into the defence industry policy, because not just for the purpose of what, you know, is being built in Australia, the capabilities that are being built in Australia, but for the spin-off benefits. But, you know, anything where, you know, labour costs are not a gigantic part of the cost of, you know, the goods or the cost of the service, and where you've got advanced technologies, there are big opportunities for us. But, you know, are we going to be making sand shoes, or in Australia, no. You know, it's so you know, protectionism is always popular politically until people have to pay more at the shops for the goods they want.
So, Russell.
No, I was just going to say, just listening to Malcolm earlier, it's the storytelling around success is so important, isn't it? So I often talk about, say, Seek, for example. Like if Seek was born in California, there already would have been 3 books and 2 movies, right? And the Bassett brothers would be, they certainly would have been sort of joint kings of Moomba at the very least. We're not good enough at telling the stories around these incredibly successful businesses, and I do think that's part of the big picture here, is finding the ways to tell these tremendous stories. And I also completely agree around the incredible innovation and digital innovation that goes on just in our sector. So in the marketing services sector, I mean, it's almost every single week someone is presenting us with a new form of technology which is going to make marketing services incredibly efficient, way more efficient than they currently are, and of course make the cost of marketing way cheaper. So, and in every single case, these platforms that are being built for marketing services can be taken around the world. You know, they're getting themselves a foothold here in Australia, and of course, there's no reason in the world why they can't, you know, go to other markets. So, again, storytelling, having a big point of view about what you can become as a digital or as a technology innovation. You know, just getting a few sales in Melbourne and Sydney and Perth, you know, that's clearly not enough. Getting yourself out into the world. I know I would say this bit, but spending the money that you need to spend on the marketing, making sure that the market is aware that you exist and is aware of the benefits of your product, of your service, of your innovation. We're not so good at that bit either, Reece. We're not great at the spend bit when it comes to the storytelling.
I agree with that, Russell. I think, you know, people forget that if they're not prepared to blow their own trumpet, no one else will blow it for them. So they've got to get out and sell. Exactly. But you're right about not, you know, you're absolutely right. There is, I mean, you know, people talk about the tall poppy syndrome in Australia. I think one of our great strengths is that we are not a deferential culture. You know, I think that's good. On the other hand, that's the good side of the coin. The other side of the coin, though, is you know, we are just great knockers of ourselves, knockers of each other, and it is, you know, that sort of negativity is a real brake on growth. I mean, for example, one of the most important bits of advice for people contemplating, you know, business or investing is to recognize that you can't get everything right all the time. You know, I mean, I used to say this when I was PM, you know, people would say, oh, will this policy work? And I'd say, well, it's my best idea I've got at the moment. But I can't guarantee everything will work. If it doesn't work, we'll dump it. If something better comes along, we'll shamelessly plagiarize it. And if something works, we'll do more of it. But, you know, if you get into this sort of, you get these companies and organizations which have a blame-based culture. And so therefore, in that context, the rational actor does not do anything, because if they do something successful, it's likely some superior will take the credit for it. Whereas if they make a mistake, they'll get smashed. So you know, this is a bit of a problem, I think, nationally. I mean, there are other countries. South Korea, for example, has a huge issue with this. The 2 presidents ago, President Myung-Bak, I think was his name, you know, actually made it a national agenda to try to, you know, persuade people to have a go and, you know, fail fast.
Yeah.
But this is so important.
Yeah, well, one of the things that we've noticed in the COVID world is we are getting to yes a lot faster. So that right? Like literally. And so one big project I'm involved with, you know, we got yes on the first phone calls, and now we're working out what yes means. Whereas previously, you'd be working out, or you'd be doing all the detail to try and get to yes. And by the time you've got to yes, it's too late anyway, right? So
is that a distinction, Russell, between this current moment and how things used to be?
Yeah, I mean, I used to go around, you know, and doing speeches and things. And I talk about this sort of overriding sense of constipation, that there was just a lack of movement, right? There's just a lack of enough stuff happening. So I certainly, in the context of my work life, that is not the case now. There isn't that sense that it's hard to make stuff happen. Quite the opposite. We're highly energized, and as I say, we're getting to yes a lot quicker. Yeah. Of course, I desperately hope that there really is a significant in the business world culture shift, and that we are energized by this getting to yes faster, and then working out what yes actually means, and be more you know, like the worst word in business is no, and my goodness me, there's been a lot of no's over recent times. So if we can get to idea conversations, if we can get to the energy that idea conversations bring, and then be far more iterative and collaborative, all of those things are happening right now. So let's make sure that we can keep that stuff going.
One initiative you've been driving in this regard, Russell, is the concept of a National Creativity Commission, which you championed at the National Press Club. What's the function of that, and what problem does that solve as against, say, an innovation agenda?
Yeah, well, it's actually it's interesting because the innovation word does freak out some. That is very true, and yet the creativity word doesn't so much. The issue with the creativity word is that it's seen in the main as a soft word. It's seen as it's a sandpit, right? It's seen as the sandpit word. It's not seen as a spreadsheet word. And so what I was trying to do in that speech, and have had lots of conversations ever since then, was try and get the signal, just like the innovation agenda. It's a signal that innovation matters. I was trying to, and continue to try to, get to the signal to the market, to the economy, to business, that creativity really does matter. And how we do things in Australia is, you know, we set up commissions. It doesn't have to be called a commission, but I just sort of liked that because I was trying to make it sound big.
Carries
right?
gravitas.
Yeah. So if you have a creativity commission, you do that because you believe that creativity matters for the economy. It matters in how we educate, and it matters how we think. It's all about divergent thinking. It's all about having, you know, ideas that seem to come from nowhere and celebrating them. Now, that only works if you've got a culture that wants creativity. You need the creative people. They must not be the ones that are just left outside the boardroom and they're let in for 7 minutes and they're asked to leave again. We need to have them in the room all the time, and we need them to be seen as equal. Right? So the spreadsheet person's always in a position to say no, because they are, as Malcolm says, that they're the rational players. Now they've won too many arguments. So let's get the creative people around the table. And let's also recognise that we actually teach creativity out of people. You know, this is one of the more, you know, insane things that we do. You know, that famous George Land research, so 1960s research, but it's still used today, just testing one's creativity. Wouldn't surprise any of us that 98% of 5-year-olds are considered to be highly creative. Yeah, but by the time that 5-year-old is an adult, it's like, you know, 2%, 5%. So we actually teach it out of people. It's just so. And the other thing that's interesting about 5-year-olds is that they actually perform in a creative sense like we are all now trying to perform. They collaborate and they iterate. You know, they work together to solve problems. And then, of course, we put individuals at desks. Now, of course, 1.5 meters apart. and then we ask them, you know, regurgitate what you have learned by yourself. None of us, when we go to work, none of us work actually by ourselves. None of us can get anything done by ourselves, right? And yet we don't really teach collaboration, creativity, innovation. Something that we've got to sort out, I reckon.
Mr. Turnbull, as putting on your investor hat, you know, the distinction that Russell made as well is the focus, I think, on STEM and the importance of it. And I don't think anyone's disagreeing with that, but that those academic pursuits don't necessarily, and correct me if I'm wrong, Russell, don't necessarily capture in totem the importance of creativity. Do you, when you're looking at investment opportunities, how do you look more broadly at investment opportunities beyond the academics?
Well, you know, you've got to, you're looking at investing in disruptive technologies. You've got to first ask yourself, there's a bunch of things you've got to, you know, tick. I mean, you know, that people have got that metaphor, you know, the horse, the jockey, the race course, you know, there are all these different ones. I essentially, you first got to ask yourself about the context. I mean, is this actually in the right stream? You know, are they in this middle of the stream? Are they, you know, is the trend your friend? You know, that's the first thing. Then you've got to, I think, you've then got to look at people. You know, I mean, I've always said, you know, the most brilliant business plan in the hands of mediocre management will fail. The most mediocre business plan in the hands of great management will succeed. And part of that is because good management, good leadership is able to change, you know, and work dynamically. You know, you've got to find people that don't have a sort of a, you know, all of those features I talked about earlier, you know, that aren't afflicted by NIH, not invented here. I mean, I think it's kind of interesting that you see companies, the tech companies that started off as big disruptors and they smashed incumbents who were crippled by their not invented here attitudes. And then as they get bigger, they acquire some of the same characteristics. So you've got to, I think, encourage people always to be prepared to re-examine what they're doing and to whether they can improve it. And that's really unsettling. I mean, I like it. I mean, I look at, you know, from a business point of view, from the way you operate, I used to do this in government too, always looking at, can we change, can we improve, can we do something differently? I mean, Julie Bishop, you know, is a great friend and colleague of mine in politics, always used to say that the reason I was so fascinated with innovation was because I got bored quickly. And there's some truth in that. You know, I do like to do things differently, but a lot of people get very comfortable. And that's why, you know, a lot of people, you'll see someone who said, oh, he's got 20 years experience. They actually might have had 1 year's experience 20 times repeated. So anyway, those are key factors. So really it's the context, the people, and of course then, you know, you've got a competitive landscape. You've always got the risk that you might have you've always got the risk, you know, you might be the Betamax when someone else has got VHS. Just to show my age.
I'm mindful of time, and we've got a lot of audience questions, so we'll try and direct a couple to both of you. And not surprisingly, a bit of a flavour of bringing a social conscience to the future of innovation and investment. And Elise Matali asks, how can creativity and innovation drive a new economy that can meet the needs of all, but within the means of the planet, i.e. circular economy, donut economics?
Well, let me be very quick. I reckon in so many areas, technology is our salvation. If you look at the issue of climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, we are now genuinely, objectively, factually in the position where we can have all of our energy coming from zero emission sources. You know, the cost of solar and wind is now so low and getting lower. The cost of storage, chemical storage with batteries is getting lower all the time. And, of course, you've got, depending on your topography, you've got the opportunity of pumped hydro, as we do with a couple of monster, big, huge projects in Australia, Snowy 2 and Battery of the Nation in Tassie. So we can do it, right? You just need to have the planning, and we'll end up with very low emission energy or zero emission energy and cheaper energy. So, that is one big challenge we can tick. But you've obviously we've got to make sure that we have a society that is where people have, where no one wants to have like a blue overall wearing equal society, a sort of a Maoist sort of vision. Of course, that wasn't really equal anyway. But we need to maintain the equality of opportunity and ensuring that everyone has access to the resources that enable them to have, a dignified life, even if, for whatever reason they're unable to earn, maybe unable to work. So that's why I used to say people would say, why are you so keen on strong economic growth? Well, it's not just for the obvious reasons. It's also because without strong economic growth, governments don't have the revenue base to ensure that you have a generous social welfare safety net. There's a lot of stuff we can do because we can afford it, and that's why the economy. People who say, "Oh, we shouldn't focus on the economy so much," well, be careful what you wish for. That economy, the government is in a sense the biggest shareholder in every business because of the tax system. As long as you've got strong revenues, then you are in the position to provide the infrastructure, the safety nets, the healthcare system that you need.
A good follow on. Oh, sorry, Russell. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that part of getting this innovation word to stick, I think part of getting it to stick is actually doing it by industry. So if you talk about we are going to embark on innovation in energy, then people are going to say, oh, well, that makes sense. So we're going to embark on innovation in education or innovation in marketing technology. So for me, the trick to selling innovation is to make sure that it's by industry. And we are going to use technology, we're going to use innovation in order to ensure that no one is left behind. And that's when I love the picture of this idea of the donut economy, which I think I'm right. I think Amsterdam has actually said that is their new policy, to create a donut economy. So it's a nice picture in the mind. Do some reading on it. It's actually really interesting, and it's good storytelling.
Mm-hmm. It's a semi-related question from Paul Chappell. They say you can't have capitalism on the way up and socialism on the way down. How do we find a middle ground to ensure private enterprise is held accountable for their own success/demise, and government support continues to support the vulnerable and nurtures the innovators? Who wants to take that?
I'm not going to suggest I'm qualified for that one.
Look, I mean, there's a great Labor historian who's a great sort of mentor of my mother's, called Bede Nairn, who wrote a book about the history of the Labor Party called Civilizing Capitalism. And I think to some extent all governments, in developed countries are doing that, to civilizing capitalism. There's not many places where capitalism is unleashed, untrammeled. So the reality is you need it isn't a sort of a black or white, right or wrong answer. You've got to have a degree of regulation, taxation, consumer protection, all of those things, which civilize capitalism, but do not strangle it. The creativity of the free market, of free enterprise, is what you want to, that's what you want to unleash and enhance. The idea that state-controlled sort of socialism of the kind that was practiced, say, in the Soviet Union is the answer. I mean, I didn't work in the Soviet Union, but I was in Russia only a few years after it collapsed, and there was still plenty of it around. Oh man, it was unbelievable. For example, they had no idea what any enterprise produced, really. That there was no proper system of accounting. And it was one of those great examples where they used to say, we pretend to work and the government pretends to pay us. It was catastrophic. And so you ended up with an economy that did a couple of things well, and mostly in the defense area and scientific area, and did everything else appallingly, much to the detriment of the community. So, you've got to, even in an authoritarian country like China, you've got to give, and they are, what's interesting about China is that you've seen that they've been able to maintain, to a large extent, a degree of competition and innovation in business and in technology at the same time as maintaining strong central control. But really, I think capitalism, capitalism, competition, innovation is the answer, but you do need the the regulation, the oversight, the protections to civilize it.
What do you make of the argument that government intervention across Western economies has brought about a sort of lurching towards the China model, or the idea that the China model in some way might be correct? And by which I mean government intervention into private enterprise. Is this the beginning of people being more accepting of the China model?
Well, I don't think the China model is exportable from China. And I don't think anyone in China believes that either, by the way. I mean, that's one of the interesting things about distinctions between, say, China and the Soviet Union. Only one of numerous. But for a start, the Soviet Union was bankrupt. But the Soviets believed, they believed in exporting communism, right? They had a whole agenda behind that. The Chinese Communist Party is very aware to the exceptionalism of China. So China does not seek to export its ideology or its system of government. What it wants from other countries like Australia is compliance. It doesn't really care how we're governed. That's our problem. But what they want is compliance, and that's why they arc up whenever there's any criticism. But I think the government involvement in business has to be done very skillfully, very judiciously. Let me give you an example of two different approaches, say, to broadband, because we can compare them. So in both Australia and New Zealand at around the same time, this is over a decade ago, there was a recognition that we needed to upgrade our broadband, and recognition that, there was huge differences. Some people had okay broadband, some people had none. In New Zealand, what they did was the government under John Key said, okay, we've got a bag of gold here, and we are going to subsidise people to roll out broadband, fibre to the premises wherever possible. But you can't be vertically integrated with a retailer, a telco retailer. And Telecom New Zealand was a vertically integrated, like Telstra, because it was the New Zealand equivalent of Telstra. And so Telecom New Zealand didn't want to, separate their network business from their retail business. And so, to their horror, a couple of areas in New Zealand were actually licensed to electricity companies, to poles and wires companies, who, if you think about it, had the linear infrastructure that enabled them to, roll out cables and all that stuff, that you need. It's pole, it's civil works, right? So Telecom New Zealand thought, good grief, we're going to be wiped out here. So they quickly separated. into two companies, Chorus, now run by a great guy, JB Russel, who was formerly NBN and a great friend and former partner and colleague of mine. So they had Chorus, a network company, and Spark, the retail business. And Chorus got all the other contracts. Now, what that meant was that the government was subsidising it because it wasn't economic everywhere, but it was being done by a company, private sector company that had been in that business for 100 years, that knew what they were doing. Here, in the crazy sort of mind of crazy policy of Kevin Rudd, we actually set up a new government-owned company called the NBN Co, which was designed to overbuild all of that linear infrastructure of Telstra. And in fact, at the outset, Kevin seemed to be wanting to put Telstra out of business. And what that resulted in was just a vast waste of money. Huge billions and billions of dollars were wasted. Now, when we got into government, we restructured it and did the best we could with it. And I think the NBN's done a great job in getting the network essentially completed now, very nearly completed. But you can see its problems were all a consequence of the government trying to do it itself right at the outset. So you're better off where something needs to be subsidised, recognise that, and then make sure that you have a proper competitive process to allocate the subsidy, and then let the private sector get on and deliver it. That's my view. And I think the Australian v New Zealand broadband experience is a very good example of that. So they got an outcome, ubiquitous broadband. Again, it's not perfect any more than it's anywhere else, but they got it done faster and at much lower cost.
Very nice. I'm conscious of time, and my apologies. We did have a lot of questions, but we capped for time. I wanted to finish with a really important question here from Warwick Peel that captures really to me the essence of what's on so many of our minds, which is, and I'll start initially at you, Russell. We've gone from 17th 5 years ago to 22nd in innovation across the OECD nations. I'll take Warwick's stats there as accurate.
I've got 23rd in the world, yep.
Okay, yep. We've slipped a lot. What are our potential future industries that will drive us up to the top 10? And I think that the essence of this for our audience is everybody is raring to go. Where do we want to inject our energies as we move into the decade ahead?
So, I have a view on this which relates to what I was saying before. Yeah. I think it's important in the Australian context is that we drive the innovation agenda on what we're already really good at. So we are amazing at producing food, for example. So what are the innovative opportunities within the food industry? We're incredible at mining. What is the innovation that we can do in the mining sector? We are incredible at education, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I would pick innovation within the industries that we already are highly competitive in.
Agree. Mr. Turnbull?
I agree. I think there's and the cooperative research centres seek to do that in the a number of areas. You mentioned mining. Also in agriculture, there's some fantastic Australian technology in agriculture. I mean, if you look at I mentioned Myriota earlier. That's sort of working closely with companies that have sensors in the field. An old friend of mine, David Spence, who is involved with a company called Goanna Ag that has sensors, distributed sensors, in the countryside, for farmers, whether they're cropping or grazing or whatever, and all of that remote sensing capabilities and technologies is enormously valuable. I mean, just saves labour, saves water, saves fertiliser, everything good. Yeah, that's right, and I think that there are many areas where we can find real specialisation. I mean, you're going to see this in the defence-related sectors.
Yeah.
The great argument in favour of having, as I was saying earlier, an Australian defence industry that is continuous is that it will see a lot of spin-offs, and that's going to be, that is already very powerful. It will continue to be so. We have great strength in cyber security. Again, that was an agenda of mine that had the first Australian cyber security strategy, but there's a whole Australian cyber security industry now. And we're seeing a lot of great innovation there as well.
Might let you follow on with some closing comments from both of you. The world is, pessimism pervades in certain parts of the world at the moment, and not surprisingly. Lead us on an optimistic note. What are you most optimistic about?
Well, Russell, why don't you, I've spoken so much, why don't you answer that first, and I'll be brief.
I'm optimistic around the new ways of working, that the new ways of working stick. I think that's going to make us more productive, and as I was saying earlier, I think we're getting to yes a lot faster than we used to. So I'm personally very energized by that, and I suspect many people that are listening would be also experiencing. Obviously, they're experiencing new ways of working. I also hope they're experiencing getting to yes quicker.
Nice.
Yep, I'd agree with that, and I'd add that I think a lot of our biggest challenges, and the biggest challenge of them all, is global warming. We now have the technology to deal with. The obstacles are largely political. There's plenty of cause for pessimism there, but at least we know how we can fix it. We know how we can get there, and technology and innovation has provided the answers. So, what we've got to do now is hope and work hard to ensure that finally, the reality of physics will overcome the idiocy of politics.
Terrific. I can't, we're a few minutes over, so thank you for the generosity of both of your time. It's been an absolute privilege to bring you together, and all the very best for the future. We'll be back next week with more guests for our next Fireside Chat. Mr. Turnbull, Mr. Howcroft, thank you both very much.
Well done, guys. Thank you.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Bye.